you, everybody. Great to see you out here at Whitfield. My name's Dean Rees and I'm the Mayor of the Rural City of Wangaratta. I'll just quickly go over so you know who everybody is. I'll get them to say their name and read their title. While they're here, we might start off with you, Sarah, please.
Sarah Brindley, Director of Corporate and Leisure.
Harry Russell, Councillor for the South Ward, and tourism's my portfolio. Thank you.
Councillor Ashley Fitzpatrick for the City Ward, and my portfolio is children, families, community wellbeing and all abilities.
Jack Perry, Councillor for the City of Wangaratta.
Brendan McGrath, CEO.
Harley Benton, North Ward and Deputy Mayor.
Councillor Dave Fuller, City Ward.
Councillor Owen Grant, Warby Ward, and my portfolios are environment, economic development and arts and culture.
Simone Nolan, Acting Director of Sustainability and Culture.
And Marcus Goonan, Director of Community Infrastructure.
Thank you, everybody. I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which we meet and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Pay my respects to the Bangarang people on land in which we operate today. Ladies and gentlemen, mighty God, we humbly ask thee to bless and guide this council in its deliberations so that we may truly preserve the welfare of all the people on whom we serve. Thank you. Tonight's council meeting isn't long agenda. Sorry, I will also state that your participation in the audience here today will be recorded. If you do not want to be recorded or on show, please let us know at the end of the council meeting, and we will try to retract it from the recording. Thank you. We'll go into firstly the item number 7. Which is the confirmation of the minutes from the previous meeting. Councillor Benson, your thoughts here?
I'll move the
Recommendation for the minutes being in true accordance with what happened in the last council meeting. Can I have a seconder, please? No, I'll have to look through. Councillor Fuller, are there any questions in relation to the previous minutes? No. I'll put the recommendation to the vote. All those in favour? The recommendation is carried with those minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to note if there are any conflicts of interest on any of these items and hereforward, and there does not seem to be any. There's no reception of petitions, no hearing of deputation. We'll move straight into councillor reports, and I'll go to corporate and leisure, and which is 13.1, and I'll look to Simone Nolan. Sorry, I won't. I'll look to Sarah Brindley, and who will update us here with the September and October quarter council meeting data change.
Thank you. So item 13.1 is proposing changed dates to the September and October scheduled council meetings, and that is due to the upcoming council elections and the caretaker period that commences in advance of those, and council's obligation to endorse its annual report. So the recommendation is that council changes the date of the September scheduled council meeting to Monday the 23rd of September at 6 p.m. and the October scheduled council meeting to Tuesday the 22nd of October commencing at 6 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the gallery on this issue? I'll look for a mover of that recommendation, Councillor Fuller, and a seconder, Councillor Fitzpatrick. All those in favour, councillors? The recommendation is carried. Sarah, thank you. Item 13.2, 2023-24 Quarter 2 Forecast Review.
Thank you. So after each quarter, council reports on its financial position against the adopted budget and any changes that need to be made to that budget. The Quarter 2 forecast report includes a decrease to the accounting surplus of 1.95 million and to the adjusted underlying operating result of 5.7 million. That sounds like a lot. The main change, however, is primarily driven by essentially accounting and being conservative in restating forecast operating grant funding timing. So every year we receive very significant grant funding called financial assistance funds, and we are just being cautious about the timing of when those funds will be received. They will be received, but we're projecting up to 50% being in next financial year, and that is worth about $4.29 million. And the other change is an increase to the material and services expenses relating to facilities maintenance costs. Capital works expenditure forecast has increased from 35.43 million to 36.97 million, which is impacted by expansion to existing projects as well as additional funding received for new capital projects. And the report itself goes through the details and a bit more information about all those changes. So the recommendation is that Council approves the 2023-24 Quarter 2 forecast review, including the decrease in the projected full-year accounting surplus to 7.69 million, the increase in capital works expenditure to 36.97 million, and the environmental upgrade agreement quarterly statement, which is as standard. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the gallery on this point? I'll put the recommendation for a mover of the recommendation, Councillor Bussell. Thank you, Councillor Bussell. Councillor Herring, would you second that? Any councillor like to talk on this issue?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
No. I'll put the recommendation. Did you want to say? Thank you. Please check.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess I just want to reiterate that it is a significant unfavourable movement. However, also reiterate that a large portion of that is due to the timing of federal assistance grants, which Director Brindley referenced, that approximate 4 million amount. However, it definitely doesn't account for the whole variance, and it not only places our underlying adjusted deficit result in deficit, but also the accounting surplus. I think it's just something that we need to keep a vigilant watch of. It's so often with these things, with budgets, that you know, they don't all tumble and fall over at once, but it's over time that things can start to move in certain directions. So just acknowledging that.
Thank you. Councillor Bussell, as the mover, did you have a reply?
No, thanks, Mr. Mayor.
I'll put the recommendation to the vote. All those in favour? And the recommendation is carried. I'll now turn to item 14.1, gambling policy. Director Goonan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This report is presented to Council to adopt policy to reduce gambling harm and a strategic plan to reduce gambling harm following exhibition. These documents have been reviewed and amended based on feedback received during the exhibition period. Based on the feedback on current best practice, the gambling policy has been renamed to shift its focus from a reduction of harm from gambling, and the action plan has been incorporated into the strategic plan from formalisation. Council committed to reducing rates of gambling amongst the community in its council plan and community vision. The draft gambling policy and action plan documents were endorsed for exhibition on October 23 council meeting. Exhibition was then extended until the end of January, and in February 2024, community members and organisations made public submissions to the councillors. This document is now ready for adoption. The recommendation is that Council endorses the change to the gambling policy and gambling policy action plan, now presented as the policy to reduce gambling harm and strategic plan to reduce gambling harm, adopt the policy to reduce gambling harm and strategic plan. Endorse and adopt those policies.
Thank you, Director Goonan. Before I go to public questions on this issue, I'll just read a question. Question from Claire Russell asked the following question for tonight's council meeting to be addressed during this matter. Question regarding the rural city of Wangaratta's policy to reduce harm from gambling, March 2024. The policy should have a clear and measurable parameters and statements, SMART goals. For example, the listing of the number of EGMs allowable. Why has the council declined to put a limit on the number of EGMs in the rural city of Wangaratta's policy? Director Goonan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for the question, Claire. We believe the document is quite clear that council don't support more EGMs in Wangaratta. We've taken a focus on how we can support the community and organisation to minimise harm and lessen their dependency on the revenue raised through this. The Rural City of Wangaratta has a municipal limit which is set by the state government of 223 poker machines. On the 30th of June, there were 154 machines operating. Although incredibly destructive, we need to understand that this is still a legal form of entertainment.
Thank you. Director Goonan, are there any other questions from the gallery? If so, please stand. And thank you, Jill. Just, Jill, there's a microphone coming around. If you can just state your name for the record.
Hi, Jill Cullen from Wangaratta, used to live at Roseriver. So I had input into reflecting on the policy, and I'm pleased to see that there are some changes here, but I'm concerned that there are gaps. There are some, I wouldn't be voting to endorse it until I saw all the wording that was there. There are some gaps which say, minor changes to wording. Well, what are the minor changes? They can actually turn out to be quite major. I don't think it's responsible to vote on something that you don't have all the information on. On attachment 4, page 57, under plan and regulate, I noticed 3.2 has got oppose, which, it's good that it's now oppose. I would like to add strongly oppose. It says oppose a proposal for a new gaming, and that's language again. So although the policy is saying that we shouldn't be using the language gaming because it's actually not a game, it's a harmful product, the policy still proposed to be using it, so it should be gambling operator or increasing the number of EGMs to an existing venue if an independent social and economic impact assessment indicates it will have negative social and economic impacts on and minimal community benefit for the community of the rural city of Wangaratta. That's what the proposal is. I really have got grave concerns about so-called independent social and economic impact assessments. I've looked at some which have been included with policies that other shires and cities have developed, and they are not independent, they are not well designed, and yet big decisions have been made on the basis of them. I know that the council had the benefit of a very thorough background briefing and a thorough background report. So I would like to ask if the councillors and the council officers, Marcus Goonan, etc., accept that the current research relating to negative and social and economic impacts on communities of the EGMs, do you accept that? Or do you think then that you need to take the next, what is seen as the next step and is noted in here, that you go ahead and order an independent impact assessment for social and economic impacts? Or do you actually accept high quality recent research, and are you informed by that? That's my question.
Thank you, Jill. Director Goonan.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, I don't really understand the question. There was a fair bit in that. Jill, I might be able to, I'm more than happy to have a conversation outside of this with you about that to clarify. But what I would say is that we certainly accept all the expert advice, and this policy was written with quite a bit of that advice taken into consideration. We also understand the legislative and legal framework that we work within here, and the fact that we have some limited control, albeit we need to form a position, and council's position, which is, I believe, representative of what the councillors believe and the greater community believe, is that we strongly oppose the addition of any EGMs on top of what we already have.
Just excuse me for one moment, Jill. Jack, did you have something to add to Jill's comments or to Marcus's comments?
Unless you would prefer to respond directly. Yeah, so I'm not sure if my interpretation of the question is spot on, but I don't think anyone is doubting the body of evidence out there about the harms of gambling, and I don't think the statement around requiring the obtainment of an independent assessment undermines that body of evidence or suggests that it's not legitimate enough. I think it's just about the need to respond to each case and each proposal with its individual context and elements considered, and bring to bear all the evidence out there in argument for or against that case. So I don't think it's in direct conflict with having the requirement for an independent assessment. I don't think it's in conflict with anyone's position on the current body of evidence. My second point, and perhaps it's a question of clarification that I might direct to Director Goonan, is who procures that independent assessment? And perhaps that is not currently really crystal clear in the policy. I read it as being council procures that independent assessment, but perhaps you could clarify that.
I would have to take that question on notice to confirm, Councillor Herrick. I believe you are reading it correctly, but I would need to check that.
Thank you. Jill, did you have a further question?
I would just like to say thank you very much for clarifying that, Director Goonan and Councillor Herring, but it doesn't actually make me feel any more comfortable about the wording that's in the policy. I think that if this is the guiding policy, and that's what we were told at Petrol Bar many years ago, you needed a guiding policy, it has to actually say what it's going to do, and it has to be clear that the research is going to be acknowledged and acted upon. Thanks.
Thank you, Jill. Are there any other questions? Yes, please. Sorry, could you just please state your name?
Yeah, my name is Jill Lindquist. I also made a submission
Thanks, Jill.
to the draft. Congratulations, Council, on taking this issue seriously. I hope that you'll take the step of joining the Alliance for Gambling Reform Leadership Council. This is a body whose full-time activity concerns reducing gambling harm around the state. There's a growing number of councils involved in this body, including Shepparton. So it's not just a metrocentric group, although they do take a big part of current membership. When I spoke to them this afternoon, they said that the metropolitan area of Melbourne really has no other opportunities for expanding poker machine gambling, and that proponents of the industry will be looking at rural locations to expand their activity, and they will be particularly looking at areas of Victoria which have population growth. We are one of those. So I hope that by joining the Alliance that you can signal strongly to the community your commitment to reducing gambling harm. So that wasn't really a question, was it? But anyway, that's my two cents worth.
Appreciate your comments. Thank you, Jill. Sorry, I'll just get Marcus to answer part of that with the gambling policy.
Jill, certainly joining the Alliance is one of the actions. It's currently sitting within our budget, which is being developed at the moment to pay for that as well.
Jeremy?
Jeremy Graybill. I'd like to thank Council for making the amendment to join the AGR. It's a great step in the right direction. First question, when at the moment would we project that we would join the AGR?
Director Goonan, as soon as the policies, if it gets adopted, I imagine.
I would assume once the budget's adopted, when we've got the funding to do that, Jeremy. I don't actually know the process exactly that we have to go through, but certainly once the policy and positions are adopted, I'll get my staff to start talking about that, and as soon as we can pay that to join the Alliance, we will join. There's no reason not to, no barriers there that I can see.
Great. Second question, Director Goonan, you mentioned that councils have limited opportunity to limit EGMs, which to some extent is true. I didn't see any mention in the minutes, or sorry, the agenda about amendments to the planning scheme, which is the strongest legal basis that we have as a council for limiting EGM growth or where EGMs can be placed in the future. Was that considered and declined? And if so, why? Or is that something that could happen in the future, or is already underway?
Good question, thanks, Jeremy.
Yeah, it's definitely something that we are considering through this policy, Jeremy. It's probably not deliberately spelt out there in as many words, but it's certainly something that we are considering. As you would know, because we've had conversations about it before, it's not a simple task to get that in, and we need to be able to align it with a number of different things. So certainly something that has been taken into consideration, certainly something that we will be looking at in future planning amendments. But yeah, you're right, it's not specifically spelled out within the document.
Thanks, Jeremy. Are there any other questions on this policy? Move forward. Can I have a movement, please, of the recommendation? Councillor Fuller, and a seconder. Councillor Grant. Thank you. Councillor Fuller, did you want to talk on the recommendation?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just acknowledging the work that the submitters put in terms of presenting to us, but also the written ones we didn't hear from, but also the staff and the work that's been coming from Marcus's team to get to this point. It was a bit of a long time coming, but I'm glad to see it's at this end of the fruition. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Fuller. Councillor Grant, do you have something to say?
Yes, well, I think this policy's been a long time coming, and I appreciate the work that has been done by the officers, but also by the community giving their input into the document. Like any document that council develops, it's not a static thing, and it's something that we can continually work at and improve. The thing that I'm most pleased about is the fact that we're putting emphasis on working in partnership with our community, with the relevant stakeholders to assist our community in the reduction of harm from gaming machines. It's not something that council can do by itself, and it's something that certainly needs the assistance of the stakeholders across the community in order for this to be effective.
Thanks, Councillor. Director Goonan, are you okay if I ask you a question?
Knock yourself out.
Just with this policy, it can be reviewed. The council laws can make a decision to review it, add some things in, change some things at a time down the track. Obviously, new council coming on at the end of this year, they wanted to add a few more things, a bit more community consultation, living and breathing document can move in and out at any time.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's quite clear timelines set out in the documents about when they need to be fully reviewed by council officers, regardless of council law's position. But certainly council laws have the right and the ability to call these things back in at any time and have them reviewed.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from council laws? Councillor Fuller, did you need to move off as the mover? No? Sorry, I didn't see you.
Sorry, it wasn't a question. Opportunity to speak. Yeah, so look, I think at the last meeting someone said the words that this policy is not perfect or was not then an endorsement, but a step in the right direction. I was certainly less confident of that statement then. I will concede that I do not think the policy is absolutely perfect in every way. I think improvements have been made in a large part to the work of community members who provided input and feedback. I do think that it is a better step in the right direction. I see it as the first of this policy of this nature in relation to gambling for the rural city of Wangaratta. As such, I would certainly personally appreciate a great deal more clarity around when it's going to be reviewed and when the policy will have that opportunity to come before council again for another meeting. I might just direct a question to Marcus Goonan just to clarify my understanding, but the timeframes for review, Director Goonan, is it just the 4-year standard review process?
I believe it is. Councillor Herry, it would be written in the document that's in front of you.
At any time, the councillor can call it in at any time, so that's...
As Mark has stated before, at any time if councillors want to bring it in to add a few more things, that can be done upon an approval in a council meeting like this. It would be reviewed and looked at and added in. And that could be with consultation with the community to help strengthen the policy.
Yep, certainly. So I'm going to move an amendment to the motion on the table.
Yep.
And that amendment is just that the review process be brought forward to a public council meeting in 2 years.
Sure.
So I guess
That's your amendment. Do we have a seconder for that amendment? Councillor Fitzpatrick, thank you. Did you want to talk on that amendment as the mover of that amendment? Anything further you wanted to add?
Yep, so I will say that I believe this is important because we need an opportunity for community, for there to be strong accountability around these actions being actioned, like the proposed actions and the proposed, the bulk of the strategy. Because I believe in the past there have been certain commitments around council's action in relation to gambling, and some of the timeframes have been quite long, probably not ideal. Another thing to keep in mind is that the fact that something is in a strategy or an action plan or a policy does not necessarily mean that it will be fully enacted. So I just think that earlier review process will be an opportunity to assess and make changes and adjust our course as required.
Thank you, Councillor Herry. So the addition to the recommendation is to have a review policy within 2 years of today's date to review, and I'll put that recommendation, sorry, does any other councillor want to speak to that addition to the recommendation? No? Oh, sorry, the amendment to the recommendation.
Just to clarify, it was a review that came to a public council meeting. So it was an item that was introduced to an agenda of a public council meeting, not a briefing review.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Can I...
Councillor Grant, please.
I'll speak against that addition proposed by Councillor Herry, in as much as as we discussed before, that this policy can come forward at any time. It doesn't need to be put in a time frame, and I would prefer not to have it in a time frame, that we could actually call it in when necessary. So I would prefer not to see that addition.
Thank you, Councillor Grant. Any other councillor like to talk to? No? Well, sorry, Councillor Herry, as the mover of that, did you want to talk further? No. Okay. So I'll put that recommendation with the amendment from Councillor Herry to a vote. All those in... Sorry, we're voting on the amendment first, which is just to review the policy every 2 years at a council meeting. Can I have a show of hands on who's for and against that? All those in favour? Councillor Herry? 2. The motion is not carried. We'll go back to the original recommendation, which is every 4 years, and obviously discussions we've had. Councillor Fuller, you happy as the mover, and Councillor Grant, you were the seconder of that original recommendation?
Absolutely, but mindful of the fact that council can review a policy, any policy, at any time, and I think that's important. That's
to get across.
Part of the day-to-day business.
Thank you. So on that note, Councillor Fuller as the mover, anything further to say before I put the recommendation to vote?
Just to speak to that review period process, there are a number of opportunities in a new council from an action plan and a long-term financial plan, and a number of other avenues of which that could be called forward if required, and it may be triggered by the community earlier than that 2 years. That's the only reason that I don't support the need to put in the 2-year time frame. It could be triggered earlier, so thank you.
I'll put the recommendation to the vote. All those in favour? And the recommendation is carried. Thank you, Director Goonan. We'll now move to item 15.1, and I'll introduce Acting Director Simone Nolan. 15.1 is a planning application 23/064-121 Templeton Street, Wangaratta, which is the demolition of existing dwelling and associated outbuildings and works for the construction of two dwellings, a two-lot subdivision, some vegetation removal and replacement of a front fence. Thank you, Acting Director.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This report is presented to Council to inform a decision for planning application 23/064, which has been referred to Council as for determination, as the application received 5 objections. The application seeks approval for the demolition of an existing dwelling and associated outbuildings, buildings and works for construction of 2 dwellings, 2-lot subdivision, vegetation removal and replacement of a front fence at 121 Templeton Street, Wangaratta. The key planning issues discussed relate to heritage impacts, neighbourhood character, amenity and overdevelopment. Having undertaken an assessment of the application against the Planning and Environment Act 1987 and the Wangaratta Planning Scheme, and having considered public submissions to the proposal and responses from referrals, officers are of the view that the application is not consistent with the Wangaratta Planning Scheme. A full assessment is included in the report. The recommendation is that Council issue a notice of refusal for the demolition of an existing dwelling and associated outbuildings, buildings and works for the construction of 2 dwellings, 2-lot subdivision, vegetation removal and replacement of the front fence at 121 Templeton Street, Wangaratta, on the grounds that are contained in the attachment of the report, and that the Council advises the applicant and submitters of the decision. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Director. I'd like to put forward an alternate motion, and that Council issue a notice of decision to grant a planning permit with respect to this planning permit application PINAP 23/064 for the demolition of an existing dwelling and associated outbuildings, buildings and works for construction of 2 dwellings for the 2-lot subdivision for the vegetation removal and replacement of a front fence at 121 Templeton Street, Wangaratta, with the attached conditions that were in it. Are there any questions from the gallery?
Excuse me, Mr Mayor, there was a public question submitted prior to the Council meeting.
I will do that. Thank you. The question from David Godfrey and Glenys Rice asked the following questions for the Council meeting. And it's question 1. We have submitted 2 objections to the proposed 2-storey development at 121 Templeton Street. Are the councils aware of the residents' objections? And if so, have they considered the visual impact of the development of this style and of the streetscape, Templeton Street, which was recently been advertised by local real estate agents as one of the most prestigious streets in Wangaratta? Thank you, Director.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The answer is that on the grounds of objection received to the application are summarised and responded to in detail and are as part of the officer's report. Thank you.
And yes, us as councillors, we were notified of the objections and the grounds for those objections. So the alternate motion is to approve, as I just said. So I was the mover of that. Sorry, are there any questions from the gallery before we move further? I'll look for. Sorry. Yes.
Does Council consider the heritage citation reports?
Yes, we do. Thank you. Could we have your name, please?
Mary Tolford from 119 Templeton.
Thank you, Mary. Simone, obviously in your recommendation, does Council consider the heritage impact? That's what we have a heritage advisor have a look at it, and obviously that question is yes.
Yes, that's correct, Mr Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there no further questions? Yes, please, Jill.
Am I correct in saying that the Heritage Advisor recommended that the development not occur?
Correct.
So I guess Mary's question is, how does that sit in council?
Yeah. The heritage advice is advice only, and Council can move either side of that advice, whether through our planning team or through councillors as a direction of Council. But it is considered on all aspects, including the current development that is there. not the current development is there, and the current development that is the application as well.
Sorry. So I happened to read through this afternoon when I was going through the gambling documents as well, and it was noticeable that the council officers had said that they had engaged with the developers and suggested ways in which the proposed development could become more congruent with the surroundings, preserving the character of the neighbourhood to a certain degree, and that those suggestions had been rejected. So where does that leave council?
Yes, some of those objections have been rejected, and some of them had been put in, including the front veranda, etc. That was modified to suit the heritage advisor's advice. It was more around the height or the bulking of the building that way. It does meet all the res code bits and pieces, all the laws of res code, just not the exact heritage. And if you view the property that's there now, I believe this doesn't. Sorry, I'm getting into a part that I don't need to talk about yet until my time comes to talk. So sorry about that.
I'd just like to make a comment, if I may, through you. Mr. Mayor, I think these questions just highlight the fact that there is expert advice and materials behind these items on the agenda, but ultimately it is council's role to make a decision taking into account that advice, and it may be in agreement with the advice given, or it may be in opposition to that advice. I'm not making a judgment call on that, I'm just highlighting the
Thank you,
process.
Councillor. It's not on the table. Thank you, Councillor Fuller. So I just wanted to ask any further questions from the gallery.
Jeremy Crable again, just a quick one. Mr. Mayor, if you are proposing to vote for this amendment, do you believe this development is consistent with the conditions of the NRZ zone? And if so, how?
Sure. You said the NRZ?
Yes.
What does that mean?
Neighborhood residential zone, the zoning for single story limited development.
It doesn't state that it's. It doesn't state that it can't have two-storey residences, and it doesn't state that it only has single dwelling and allotment. So it can be viewed in that. So yes, I am aware of that, and it can be multiple developments as there is in that street already. So thanks for the question. Are there any other further questions from the gallery? So the alternate motion that I moved was to grant the permit for this development. Can I have a seconder, please, for that? Councillor Bussell. Thank you. So as the mover, I'd just like to talk about the development. I did speak directly to the building designer in relation to this to make sure that the building meted the res code laws, which basically means that if there wasn't a heritage overlay, would this building fit the site and be approved that way? Yes, it was. They put the setbacks right, they've got the overshadowing right, overshadowing on the neighbour's house next door with solar is correct, etc. We're in a housing crisis at the moment. We haven't got enough houses. This is to take one house away that isn't a flash-looking home at present, and certainly doesn't fit the neighbourhood character of the area with an aluminium cladded home. This development, the owner has built a veranda to compensate with the houses next door to give it that California bungalow appeal to it, which those houses do have. I feel the development is a good development. When we look around the area, there's 2 or 3 houses up the road, there's houses of all different styles and eras. We've got the private hospital over the road and up a bit there too, which doesn't. We have a 2-storey house just around the corner in Dixon Street in a heritage overlay that was built and approved under recommendation from council, which doesn't fit any heritage overlay or our outlook on heritage. I think the owners have worked well on this design and plan to best fit in with the environment there as best they possibly can. Thank you. Councillor Bussell, do you have anything to add further?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. We just can't keep going. Building houses like we have done in the past. We need to be a bit more creative. We need to use our space better, and I support this, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Any other council would like to speak for or against the recommendation? Councillor Harry, please. Just grab the mic.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm speaking against the motion that's on the table. I'll also foreshadow that if this motion lapses, I will move a motion as per the recommendation on the agenda. The first item I'd like to touch on and maybe just clarify is regarding res code. Mayor Rees, you made comments that if the heritage component were a consideration, everything in res code would be a thumbs up and it would meet the criteria. I'd just like to clarify and make it very clear that heritage components are a prominent, significant part of res code. So I personally don't think it's fair to just kind of take that component out. And I guess just generally speaking, I think Councillor Bustle's comments around we need to do things differently and think about things differently apply in this instance, and we need to apply that thinking with respect to design. We need to design things differently such that they do pay respect to those important considerations and they fit in with our valuable heritage streetscapes, of which this is one. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else like to talk for or against the recommendation? Or the motion, sorry, the alternate motion? No? I'll just finish off then and stating, thanks Jack for your comments there. I will state about 20 years or so ago, heritage was whacked on a whole lot of areas around Wangaratta that never had it. And I'll state that the heritage isn't a determining authority, they are purely an advisory authority only and have no say in relation to what council could make decisions or our planning team could change a decision around that. So on those comments, I'll put the alternate motion to the vote. All those in favour? 4 and the 5, sorry, and the alternate motion is carried. Thank you. Thank you. 15.2, planning permit application 23-1/167, 64 Graham's Lane, Hansonville, for a 2-lot re-subdivision.
Thank you, Mayor Rees. This report is presented to Council to inform a decision for planning application 23/167, which was called into Council for determination on the 5th of February 2024. The applicant seeks to re-subdivide 2 existing lots to effectively excise an existing dwelling at 64 Graham's Lane, Hansonville. The key planning issues discussed relates to the protection of the productive agricultural land, the fragmentation of agricultural land, the proliferation of dwellings in the farming zone, and the land use conflicts with the rural lifestyle properties. Having undertaken an assessment of the application against the Planning and Environment Act 1987 and the Wangaratta Planning Scheme, officers are of the view that the application is not consistent with the Wangaratta Planning Scheme. Full assessment is again included in the attachment 1 of the officer's report. The recommendation is that Council issue a notice of refusal for the 2-lot re-subdivision at 65 Graham's Lane, Hansonville on the grounds contained in attachment 1 and will advise the applicant of the decision. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I have Councillor Benton, sorry?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
It's coming.
Have an alternative motion in relation to this matter. The council will issue a notice of decision to grant the planning permit with respect to the planning permit application 23/167 for a 2-lot subdivision of Graham's Lane in Hansonville with the following conditions. I'll read the conditions there.
Proposed conditions are outlined there in the recommendation moving forward. Are there any questions from the gallery on this alternate motion? And that's to issue a permit. Issue a notice of decision to grant a planning permit with respect to this permit application for a 2-lot re-subdivision at 64 Graham's Lane. No. Councillor Benton, you were the mover. Sorry? Yes, Jeff. Please state your name, Jeff.
Jeff Binning. I just want to point out in the 15.2 at the top it's 64 Graham's Lane and then the recommendation is 65 Graham's Lane.
In the alternate recommendation, it does state 64 Lane, and that's the alternate motion that we're looking at the moment, which is good. Thanks for the pick up on that for the original recommendation. So the alternate motion is at 64 Graham's Lane, which is correct, Jeff?
Yep.
Great. So if there's no further questions from the gallery, Councillor Benton moved the alternate motion. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Grant. Councillor Benton, did you want to talk on the alternate motion, please?
Yes, Mr Mayor, in moving the motion is to really the reasons to not grant it was to fragment agriculture or the housing allotment wouldn't be able to support agriculture. I think over my years in local government, these have always been a little bit of a ticklish issue. However, in this incident, it really tightens up and there'll be no more development. And one thing that was very, very strong, even when we did the rural planning strategy, was to maintain one home per or dwelling per 40 hectares, which I think this does. And it makes sure it is the best of our ability as a council to put a 173 over the agreement of the remaining land to enhance that the dwelling density will not be any greater. I will add that as we go into some of the farming are getting older, they still want to remain in the community where they are. And I think it's a little bit sad when you get to that stage in life that you've got one alternative choice and the only choice is what a planning situation gives you, is to move out of the community that you're worked in and still want to remain in and start a life new over again. I think I'll leave it there, Mr Mayor. I think it's pretty straightforward.
Thank you, Councillor Benton. Councillor Grant?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And I'm supporting this for a number of reasons. We've already got this type of arrangement across the rural city of Whitfield, so it's nothing new. And I think it's not just about giving people an opportunity to stay in the community that they've always lived and worked in, but it's also about allowing agricultural land to actually be consolidated. So we're making more agricultural land available. We're giving someone the opportunity of staying in the community that they've always been in and being part of the social fabric of that local community. And also too, looking into the future, the potential for that excision to support someone who actually lives and works in the rural area. We've got to look at different ways of how we do housing. There's no one size fits all or one plan fits all. We've got to look at what suits the local community, and if we can consolidate communities with people and give them a social heart, I think that's got some real benefit. And we're not taking anything away from agriculture in this instance, we're actually adding to it. So that's the reason that I'm supporting it.
Thank you, Councillor Grant. Any other councillor? Councillor Bussell?
Yes, thanks, Mr Mayor. I'll support this. I support what's been said previously with the other councillors. I think this is a win for potentially more productive use of the land, and it's a win for the resident. So, being a farmer myself, I'm very, very comfortable with this, Mr Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bussell. Councillor Herriot?
Thank you, Mayor Rees. So I'm going to speak against the motion on the table, largely because I am of the understanding that Section 173 agreements have been, there's case law examples where they've been recognised as not a legitimate way of precluding rights that would otherwise be afforded in the planning system. So normally this re-subdivision would result in a very small lot with the dwelling and then a larger substantial balance of land, and that balance is of a size such that it would have an as of right dwelling on that. So the Section 173 is kind of trying to be put in place in order to remove that as of right to that dwelling, I'm of the understanding, and I'm happy to be corrected by any of by the CEO or Acting Director Simone Nolan, that there have been examples where BPAC have ruled that you can't use Section 173s to remove as of right type of privileges. And that leads me on to the second point, which is about why it's so unfavourable for there to be this as of right privilege question not absolutely accounted for, and that's because agricultural land with increased density of dwellings of people living there that may not be participating in associated agricultural activities, and the second lot could be sold off, so then you've got another person conducting agricultural activities around a separate ownership, a separate dwelling. It's just a recipe for friction. That's all it does. It just creates friction in our communities, and it makes it difficult for operators to conduct agricultural activities in those situations, in those settings. I think I'll leave it there. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Councillor Herry. There's no further question, no further submitters to that. I'd like to certainly say a few points. We talk about helping farmers. The biggest thing that farmers are suffering at the moment, multi-use land, and they can't find workers because they can't accommodate themselves out in the area in which they want to work on people's farms. And certainly our owner of this property will live there for many number of years, but eventually that property will go on the open market at some stage and become a property for a young farmer or a young worker to enhance farming by being able to be 5 minutes down the road from his place of work, not half an hour away in Wangaratta to drive out to work and drive back in every day. So this to me is also enhancing farming. So enabling this to go ahead allows for more scope. Worker accommodation is the biggest thing. We've just approved in the past accommodation on some of the wineries. Worker accommodation is getting sought in other farms elsewhere because they're suffering. They can't get the workers out of their property being so far out. So this to me adds again to the produce of farming. At that I'll leave that and I'll head back to Councillor Benton if there's no further. Councillor Fuller? Oh no, Councillor Benton, as the mover you have the last right of refusal.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, but in relation to Councillor Herring's concerns around 173, it's not a perfect world we live in, and anywhere can start to have a subdivision, but a 173 is the best tool we've got at the moment to make sure that the density stays as it is at the moment, like it has been for the last 50 to 60 years. To remove that, the person has to come back to the council table to make sure that is removed, as far as I'm aware of at the moment, and it's still the best tool we've got. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Benton. Without further ado, we'll put the recommendation to the vote. All those in favour of the alternate motion? And the alternate motion is carried. Thank you. Yes. Yes, division. All those in favour of the alternate motion, please raise their hand. Councillor Harry Bussell, Councillor Ashwood Fitzpatrick, Councillor Harvey Benton, Councillor Dave Fuller, Councillor Irene Grant and Councillor Dean Reeves. And all those against, Councillor Jack Herring. Thank you. We'll now move to the next item, which is item 15.3, which is the planning permit application 23201 at 352 Shanley Street, Wangaratta South. Use and development of an office and accommodation building ancillary to the existing rural store. Acting Director.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This report is presented to Council to inform a decision for planning application 23/201, which has been referred to Council for determination as the application received 21 objections. The application seeks approval for the use and development of the land for an office and accommodation building ancillary to an existing rural store at 352 Shanley Street, Wangaratta South. The key planning issues discussed related to land use compatibility, the nature of the rural store land use, traffic and amenity management, and potential environmental issues. Having undertaken an assessment of the application against the Planning and Environment Act 1987 and the Wangaratta Planning Scheme, and having considered public submissions to the proposal and responses from referral authorities, officers are of the view that the application is consistent with the Wangaratta Planning Scheme. A full assessment is included in attachment 1 of the report. The recommendation is that Council issue a notice of decision to grant a planning permit for the use and development of the land for an office and accommodation building and ancillary to an existing rural store at 352 Shanley Street, Wangaratta South, subject to the conditions contained in attachment 1 of the report, and that Council will advise the applicant and the submitters of the decision. Thank you, Mayor Rees.
Thank you, Director. There are a number of questions in relation to this planning application, and quite a few, so I will read them all out and have answers from our Director in relation to that. So, Shanley Street question submitted by Mark Radnell. With regard to the off-road motorcycling track at 352 Shanley Street, which the Council has allowed, what plans does the Council have to improve civic amenity by placing conditions on its use to prevent nuisance from dust, noise, light, runoff, etc., particularly for the local residents who are easily within distance to be negatively impacted by the use? Director.
What's the relevance to this plan?
I'm going to let the questions go through, but thank you, and the point of relevance will either be shown or not shown in the reply to questions. Thank you, Director.
Thank you, Mayor Rees. Council has not allowed the track, rather it did not require a planning permit. It is therefore as of right and not subject to any planning conditions.
Thank you. Question 2. Having allowed the use of the property close to many rural residents, is Bruce you again here? Oh, Jess, sorry, I just want some lights in front of me. Thank you. Sorry. Question 2. Having allowed the use of the property close to many rural residences as a kangaroo carcass processing facility, what plans does the Council have to prevent expansion of this facility, considering the effect this has and will have on nearby residences with regards to its unsightly nature, traffic waste disposal, considering how close it is sited to the nearby residents? The owner of this facility has stated that he will be planting screening for both the unsightly track and also for the facility. How will Council police this and enforce this? Director.
The answer, any expansion of the rural store will require further planning approval for the rural store with a floor area greater than 100 square metres. If the land use transitions to include processing, the applicant would need to seek prior planning approval for the use of the land for rural industry. This would be subject to the assessment on its merits based on the planning scheme and context of the site and the surrounds. The officer recommendation includes a requirement for screening, planting around the proposed office and accommodation and parking hard stand area. Completion of this planting would be enforceable under an issued planning permit. Planting around the motorcycle track would not be able to be enforced as part of an issued permit for the application, currently under assessment, as that title allotment does not form part of the subject site. Thank you.
Question 3 is the property has a very large capacity power supply connected to it. One use for this, although conjecture, is for lights for the kangaroo carcass and processing facility and the off-road motorcycle track. Considering the impact of the lighting it would have close by for the neighbours, if this is established, what plans does Council have for limiting the establishment and use of such lights?
And the answer, Mayor Rees, the officer recommendation includes a standard condition that any lighting for the rural store must be baffled and directed so as not to be directed into neighbouring property. Thank you.
I will also state in that question and a couple of those questions, it says for a processing plant. This is not a processing plant and the applicant does not have a licence to process. These are questions from Craig Jenkins, also received on this. Have all biosecurity risks associated, and there's quite a lot of questions here, and understand if people don't want to, if you're not part of this application, you are okay to leave or just wait around outside, but you're welcome to stay, please. Have all biosecurity risks associated with the activity of killing kangaroos on the northeast agricultural sector? Thank you, Director.
The existing rural store operations are not subject to the application under the assessment.
On the 24th of the 3rd, 2024, at approximately 7 a.m. on Shanley Street, a Toyota Land Cruiser drove past with approximately 15 to 20 dead kangaroos hanging on it. How would council laws deal if this were the street they lived in?
Again, the existing rural store operations are not subject to the application under assessment. Thank you.
Why do members of council feel that it is appropriate to approach the neighbours of the applicant to advocate for the commercial operation of storing dead kangaroos and butchering them at the property? Are the councillors with a bias on this application withdrawing themselves from a vote? Director.
The existing rural store operations are not subject to the application under the assessment. Thank you.
And I imagine that question was aimed at me because I have met the applicant, as I have taken Councillor Grant also to meet the applicant, and maybe other councillors have met there as well. I've also met and spoken to objectors as well to hear both sides of all stories. Thank you. And again, I point out that they aren't butchering kangaroos on site. Why has council already permitted the activity of the storage of dead kangaroos and the butchering in a shipping container at the property so close to private residences and designated water? Director.
Again, Mary's, the existing rural store operations are not subject to the application that we're looking at, and also the rural store was established as of right and did not require planning approval.
The applicant has been viewed throwing meat chunks from the container into a ute at the property and high pressure hosing of the shipping container where the dead kangaroos onto the ground. Director Noel.
Thank you, Marys. The rural store operations again are not subject to the application under assessment. The proponent has been advised that any processing on site associated with the business would be considered a rural industry and require planning approval.
Thank you. Why does the applicant believe that he can tell neighbours, you can complain as much as you want, the council are on my side? Director, yes, we can't answer that, but yeah, any application lodged is assessed with its merits against requirements of the planning scheme, regardless of who lodges an application. We'll move on to the next question. If the applicant had any consideration for the neighbours, why did they leave the main access drive directly across from the neighbouring house? And expanded operation would make the impacts on this much greater? Director.
It is understood that the access way is not subject to this application as it is existing.
Why did the applicant ever consider the area on the edge of Wangaratta an ideal location to undertake the activity of storing and butchering dead kangaroos? Director.
The existing rural store operations are not subject to the application under assessment.
Why have council selected the planning legislation the activity of a rural store to be an appropriate definition of the storage of dead kangaroos when it is clearly a meatworks or a knackery? Director.
Thank you, Mayor. The proponent has been advised that any processing on site associated with the business would be considered a rural industry and require planning approval. The storage in isolation, as is currently being undertaken on site, is considered to fit within the definition of a rural store.
Thank you. Why would you rezone neighbouring land for more houses to be built alongside a dead kangaroo storing and butchery facility?
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Director.
Yep. Land to the east was rezoned to the rural living zone prior to the establishment of the rural store. The subject site is located within the farming zone. Thank you.
Why is the lighting on at all hours of the night and morning when there is no one at the property? Thank you, Director.
This again is the existing rural store operations are not subject to the application under assessment.
Thank you. And why has the applicant put in such a large electrical infrastructure prior to any approvals being granted?
And the answer remains the same. Thank you, Mayor. The existing rural store operations are not subject to the application under the assessment. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the gallery? Are there any questions from the gallery on this issue? No? Thank you. Can I have a mover of the recommendation, please? Councillor Bussell. Councillor Herry as a seconder. Councillor Bussell, did you want to talk on the recommendation?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a farm zone, and people need to understand that there are activities in farming zones. That's why we have zones. And farming and what goes on in the farming zone needs to be protected. This is a good business, I believe, here in Wangaratta. And I respect the people that object, but after all, we all have the right in the appropriate zones to operate appropriate businesses, and this is. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Herry, did you want to come?
Thank you, Mayor Rees. Yeah, I just want to acknowledge the submissions and the objections that were made and acknowledge the concerns that were raised in those. Don't want to discount those. However, many of the concerns did relate to matters that are not part of tonight's decision and don't relate to the planning matter in front of us. Indeed, many of the concerns relate to elements which are outside council's jurisdiction altogether. Certainly, I don't think council should turn a blind eye to things that are outside its jurisdiction. It should do everything within its due diligence and responsibility, but it shouldn't take on board responsibilities that completely sit outside council. I just want to make it clear that this planning decision relates to a temporary transportable dwelling, accommodation, and office, which is, the arguments for it are outlined in the report, but is in support of an agricultural activity. Another point I want to make really clear is that rural living zone is not a residential zone. It's not a zone that's meant to be treated as a residential zone. It's not meant to be considered a zone that has the amenity benefits that you would necessarily associate with residential zoned land. And much of the land is farming zone around this subject site, but the rest of it is rural living zone. And that's a really important consideration, I think, that means that, yeah, we can't apply those amenity considerations on the subject site. I think that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Anybody else like to talk on the recommendation? Councillor Grant, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm actually going to speak against the motion. And while it is consistent, while the application is consistent with the planning scheme, I've got a number of concerns around the whole workability of the application, and that's why I'm speaking against it. I'm just concerned that there's been development there that has raised huge concerns in terms of the surrounding amenity, and I just am concerned. Given that the surrounding area is part of the growth area of the rural city of Wangaratta, I'm hoping that the development will be appropriate and the impact of the development will be small because it is also in a significant water catchment area. And I would be very concerned that the development would have an impact on, the natural environment going into the Morby Ranges and down towards the creek. So, and while I understand that, that this is a farming zone and we provide the use the land for agriculture, this is probably not agriculture as we know it in traditional sense. So I'm trusting that it will develop appropriately, but I will speak against it and not support it.
Thank you, Councillor Grant. Councillor Benton.
In agonising over this and over my 20 years in local government, I don't think I've come across a planning application so clunky, so difficult to separate one from the other. And yet, at the end of the day, the application is really about the dwelling and not about the activities in the rural store. And a lot of the rural activities, after personally considering some of the sort of the actions that are happening in that store myself over the years, prime safe are the ones that are the governing body, and they're the ones that are going to have to keep the applicant activities in the store up to date, up to speed, and in control of their permit. No different to anything that we do on our own individual blocks with the environmental assessments. It's up to the environmental people to do that, and EPA. If we did refuse the applicant, I think he could go to VCAT and quite easily get it, and with probably no conditions on it whatsoever. And it's going to be something that I think shows, in my opinion, where planning is really deficient. And I don't take any saying this against the officers, because I think they've struggled with it just as much as we as council have struggled with it, to try and come to some sort of an assessment. So I'd just like to point out that the activities of that rural store is prime safe. And if you've got any issues with it, it's prime safe that you contact going forward in relationship to that, even though that the dwelling is going to be a office accommodation for workers, the activities that are in that rural store must come under prime safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Harry, do you have something to add there?
Thank you, if I may, Rees. I just wanted to echo those comments around the jurisdiction being prime safe, and then my earlier comments about not taking on responsibilities outside our jurisdiction. I want to make 2 points. One is around the definition of agriculture, because I have it in a question in my mind: how is the activity of killing kangaroos off-site, bringing them on-site in short-term storage and moving them on considered agricultural activity, and therefore legitimate for having an accommodation that supports an agricultural activity? And it was made clear to me that it is legitimately defined as an activity supporting agriculture, because the killing of the kangaroos, whatever your view may be around that matter, is done on farming zone, and it is providing a benefit or support to agricultural activities off-site through eradication of those, through killing those animals which are perceived as a pest by those agricultural operators. So I just want to make it clear that it absolutely does fit the criteria and definitions and classifications in the planning scheme for an agricultural activity. Secondly, I just want to say that this area is not within our long-term strategic growth area, not in any document for future higher density growth.
Thank you, Councillor. If there's no further questions, I'll go back to Councillor Bussell to finish off the conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Agriculture comes in many forms, and I would have thought that it was a sign of a very good employer to offer places for their staff and have an office. I don't think either of those are unreasonable. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillors, I'll put the recommendation to approve to the vote. All those in favour? And the recommendation is carried. Yes. Thank you, Councillor Herrick. Can we have a division? All those in favour, please raise their hand. There is Councillor Bussell, Councillor Fitzpatrick, Councillor Herry, Councillor Rees, Councillor Benton and Councillor Fuller. Thank you. And against is Councillor Grant. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We will move on to Advisory Committee's item 17.1 is the biannual audit and risk report. Is 17.1. I'll hand over to Brendan McGrath with the microphone to bring these into the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. So under the Act, our Audit and Risk Committee are required to provide 2 reports to Council on their activities across the course of the year. And this one is a report from that committee for the period July 2022 to the 31st of December 2022 for Council's noting.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the gallery on this item? No. Councillor's going to have a mover, Councillor Fitzpatrick, and a seconder. Councillor Herrick. Touch the glasses, I'll take that. If there's no comments from the council group, I'll put the recommendation to vote. All those in favour? And the recommendation is carried. Thank you, Brendan. 18.1 minutes of advisory committee meetings, please.
So we have a series of minutes there from our Audit and Risk Committee, our Sport and Rec Advisory Committee, and our Arts and Culture Advisory Committee for meetings across the period December through to February for Council's noting.
Thank you. If there's no comments from the gallery or questions from the gallery, I'll put the look for a mover, please, again. Councillor Fitzpatrick, and a second to Councillor Fuller. If there's no comments, I'll put the recommendation to the vote. All those in favour? Yes, and the recommendation is carried. Ladies and gentlemen, it's come to that time of the evening where we do public questions on anything to do with council or council issues or surrounding issues. We'll best answer the questions as best we possibly can. However, if we can't, we will take the question under notice and we will get back to you privately at some other stage. So I'd just like to read out a question from the Wangaratta Stingrays, and I'll just get it up now. From the Wangaratta Stingrays Club. So thank you to them, and thank you for being here. I think there's a couple of people here from the Stingrays. Yes, thanks for being here. Wangaratta Stingrays Club are concerned that the club's viability is at stake due to an unequal access to the WISAC facility. The WISAC facility is our Wangaratta Sports and Aquatic Centre. How does the current treatment of Wangaratta Stingrays Club fit with Council's values? Wangaratta Stingrays are being told that we will not have the existing lane access over winter, as a preference of lanes is given to the Wangaratta Amateur Swimming Club, and that they are the preferred club for Wangaratta. The club is also being told we have to pay additional costs to enter the pool, as well as have memberships for all of our members. So essentially, the WSAC will double dipping on Wangaratta Stingrays Swimming Club. We've not been told we need an MOU for the facility. Do all other users have an MOU? We have also advised that any requests in the MOU must fit around the needs of the Wangaratta Amateur Swimming Club. We have also been advised that the newly formed Masters Swimming will get preference over our club as they are affiliated with the WSAC. Just like to read out the response that we've given here is that thank you for your letter. I've also personally reviewed this. We are very lucky in Wangaratta. We have a wonderful aquatics facility and a swim club such as yourselves and the other swimming club that are active users. We recognise that along with the physical benefits of swimming clubs also play an important role in building confidence, teamwork and community connection. We're keen to help all clubs to thrive the best we can. Regarding the issue you have raised, Council is offering the support of our Governance Officer to assist you and the WISAC in reaching an agreement that will work through these matters such as lane hire and appropriate fees. We understand that through recent meetings with your President and the WISAC Manager, there will also be monthly meetings to continue building positive working relationships. Many users have booking agreements in place with the WSAC. For yourselves, this may be sufficient as a way forward, or it may be more beneficial to develop an agreement or an MOU, which is a Memorandum of Understanding. For want of a better word, there is a reality of the limited numbers of lanes and the centre that we do need to be shared between the clubs, public swimming and other demands. We understand why you are eager for clarification of the arrangements in readiness for the winter season, obviously because the more pool use will be inside. You are also correct that the Wangaratta Amateur Swimming Club has an existing lane hire agreement in place, which was agreed after they made a substantial contribution to the upgrade of the outdoor pool. We would like our Governance Officer to work closely with you and the WISAC team to seek the best possible outcome for all users of our centre down there. So thank you for the question. I'd also like to, that's that question. Number one, sorry. So Dean Hurlston asked a question to be addressed at the council meeting. Question one, he's got 3 questions here that are allowed. Normally it's only a 2-question thing at public question time, but please, we'll have a bit of leniency on some. What amount of waste enforcement cost is the current financial year 2023-24 has council included in its waste levies charged to residents, if there has been any at all? Question number 2, what amount of revenue has council included in the current financial 23-24 year from waste enforcement actions? And question 3, has that revenue been offset in the waste levy or applied to council's general revenue streams? And I'll look to Director Goonan, who handles our waste section vigilantly, to answer these questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for the question. No waste enforcement charges are included in council's waste levies charged to residents. Council have allowed no revenue from waste enforcement actions, and therefore there is nothing to offset.
Right. That answers that question. Thank you. I also have a public question from James Finlay. Asked the question to be asked at the council meeting tonight. The King Valley has continued to be impacted by power and communication outages of up to 18 hours twice in the last summer. The backup systems to keep these services running is inadequate. We have elderly people and people with chronic health conditions who rely on functional telecommunication systems to support them. With the increase in tourism to our area, the population of the valley at times booms. Come another significant event during a boom weekend which takes these essential services out, we are not in a position to support them all. While there appears to be buckets of money to support and grow tourism, where is the money to support essential services to function in times of crisis? What action is the council taking to support our community during these events? And how are you holding the telecommunications and power companies to account? What further action can council be doing in this area? And I've attached a report for this event to help context the question. So thank you very much, James. I'll also look to Director Goonan for a reply.
Thanks, James, for your question, and particularly for the report that you attached to your question. I can see there's a lot of time and effort gone into that. It's an issue that we're very aware of at an officer level, and council officers have worked with members of the Upper King Valley community, CFA and Victoria Police to learn more about the communication challenges over the past few years and how that impacts on the community through our emergency services team, and people would know Steve Tucker in particular. One of the main challenges is response times to the King Valley. Currently a tech that fixes these things is located in Mansfield. Officers have been advocating for electricians locally in the King Valley to obtain the necessary certification and to be able to perform the necessary connections and reinstatement, and this will greatly improve reconnection times. Other areas officers are working on include the knowledge of critical infrastructure and the need for emergency managers to have knowledge when consequence planning. These are raised at a state level and through the Emergency Management Victoria channels. Council officers sit on the INDI Telecommunications Advisory Group. Officers through this group provide advice on areas of concern for both telephone and internet connections at a federal level, and this guides federal government black spot funding. Council officers and councillors will continue to advocate to federal, state governments and also utility companies to improve the emergency outcomes for the entire municipality. Regarding funding buckets, most of the money being spent on works in Whitfield and Cheshunt, which I assume is what we are talking about, is funding from the state government. Although these works do benefit tourism, the works are largely taken from the rural pacemaking projects, which were driven by the local community for the local community.
Thank you, Director. Are there any other questions from the gallery? Now's the time. Sorry, I've read all the questions that were handed in. Are there any questions? Please, Jamie. Please state your name.
Jamie Fisher, Chair. I'd speak very much in favour of James' letter which he's sent to you. The reality is that these outages are really freezing the community, and many representations have been made by us through Ms Haynes as well, and also to CFA and also to state government. and it's a serious need for it to be coordinated, somebody to actually take charge of it at a domestic level. And it's a plea that there be some sort of rather a palliative view, as the director might have given, about what is being done, but nothing is being done. And that's the tragedy. And we are likely very soon to have some real problems associated with particularly radio telephone connection from CFA further up the Rose River. CFA have finally come to the acknowledgement that we must have some form of satellite communication, and we'd like Council to also take a view of being involved with that sort of interconnected communications with their own facilities. In WA, there are, in every police vehicle in WA, there is a Starlink connection, so that all emergency services are connected in those by the most efficient form of communication. So we need to come up to 2024 with these emergency situations, and up this end of the valley we seem to be a bit more exposed to the dangers of them as they've occurred so recently.
Thank you, Jamie. I'll also endeavour with the CEO to have a meeting early in the next couple of weeks with Helen Haynes and sort of sort out where that process is at, not just for emergency services, but for the general residents who are having their power outages and can't use their phones, even for our tourist destinations up here that can't use their FPOS machines to take people's money. It is a huge concern. I know Helen Haynes has been working on things, but where is it at? So can we make a note for us to catch up and talk further? And if we have to go and advocate further at federal level, we need to go and do that. Several seats down there. Thank you. Any other questions from the government, please? Yes.
Pause for the microphone.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, would the Mayor and the Councillor for the Southern Ward give the meeting an update on the problems of housing in our community, particularly houses for rent and housing to buy and rent at a reasonable price, particularly for people struggling to buy their first home?
Thank you for your question. I'll certainly refer to Councillor Russell for out here. Again, I look at one of our planning applications tonight that we approved. Eventually, certainly not having to go with the owner here, but the owner will, as we all don't live forever, will be a house that will come for sale or for rent at some stage in its life on a smaller acreage of land that is more affordable. Young people can't buy out here on 150 acres or 100 acres, whatever what the limit is, because it's too expensive. However, smaller properties like on 5 acres will allow that type of situation to happen. I have a look at the housing crisis in town. Council's working very hard. We've got 42 housing units being built now by departments for social and affordable housing. We've got 2 or 3 applications that are approved, ready to go for more of these developments. One in Parfitt Road of about, I think, 18 units down there. We've got some just going out on the Alpine Highway just to the right there opposite the church there, which is also a housing development on behalf of the government. We also have things further out the road, and Parfitt Road again on a property that's being planning application at present for development of disability affordable housing for disabled people as well. Council's also working very hard with the state and federal government on our old tech school site to supply both worker accommodation, affordable and social housing through an organisation that give back, which is Kids Undercover. We're currently in the process of funding applications, helping out with the funding application by the applicant. We've earmarked an applicant, we've seen designs, etc., that will turn a horrible old site back into accommodation that will benefit the community. I will state at a different level with, and being in the real estate game, the reasons that we hear around the private investor not investing into real estate and getting out of it is the costs are too high, interest rates are too high, rates are too high. Put that one in. Sorry. So there's land taxes now coming in the Victorian government. Everything is working against. Then you've got capital gains tax. You make a bit of money on it, we'll capital gains tax you as well. So there's no incentive for the private investor to come in and start building houses when they're just going to get taxed, and the rental return doesn't compensate the $600,000 and $700,000 output by a person to do it. They're putting their money into managed funds to get that with no risk. So that's what's happening in these areas, but we are certainly ahead of the curve compared to a lot of areas on our social, affordable and worker accommodation. There are hurdles along the way with government to release the funding. They've got a housing model. Brendan, CEO, and myself went to the Rural Housing Summit in Canberra a few weeks back, hosted by Helen Haynes, and all the communities having trouble getting the funding out of the government. They've got all this money to give, and the hurdles to jump over are just astronomical. So they're looking at ways through Helen Haynes, is working well on this program to limit those hurdles in their height so they can be stepped over a lot quicker. So I commend her for doing that and bringing this to the forefront.
Mr Mayor, can I also add something to
Please.
that? Sorry. So Council are also working on an affordable housing strategy. We've actually had an officer working on that for the last 6 months or so. So that is something that will come to Council over the coming, I'd say 6 months before we've actually got it formally adopted. That has a number of recommendations and actions in it to alleviate some of the concerns that you are speaking on.
The Victorian government have also done good things in relation to, it's not like me to say the good things, but they certainly have limited the housing in backyards without the need of planning application, as long as you're in an overlay area, for dwellings under 60 square metres. So that's a great thing by the state government, and also the minimum lot size down to 300 square metres that we've been working on for years and just about to adopt, and they did it for the whole of Victoria. So that again, you can build a dwelling on something under 300 square metres without a planning permit, and that process and cost is part of the process. So there are good things happening everywhere along those lines. Yep, and they have made a huge provision for key worker accommodation on farms to be able to get through that process extremely quickly. So need more farmers to do that. Councillor Bussell, did you have any add-ons there as the Mayor of the Great Southern Land?
No, Mr Mayor, I think that the affordable housing strategy, excuse me, will answer some of those questions, but it is quite an important issue that we all face in the rural sector with not enough housing, particularly for workers and for low-paid people. So thanks, John, for the question, and we'll endeavour to answer all of the question as we go along. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Sorry, I've got Jeremy over here. Yes, Jeremy, you're right.
Thank you. So I now represent the vast majority of the objectors in the VCAT case regarding 7-Eleven. We've had 2 preliminary hearings already, and we're going to hearing in June. After the first preliminary hearing, I met over the phone with the town planner who's been hired by council. It's my understanding that the reason that council hired a town planner is because there's a conflict of interest between the officer's report from the planning department and the council vote. Is that correct? I see some nodding heads. That's my understanding. So I think that was a yes. That's not really, I just want to...
Yeah, I wouldn't describe it as a conflict of interest, but there is an obvious difficulty when officers recommend one thing and the councillors decide the opposite. For those same officers then to go and make that argument at VCAT is very difficult when VCAT can sit there and see what the officer's recommendation was versus the council decision. So yes, we do bring in an independent person to help with those.
Yep. So I've got 2 questions. The first is, since those 2 hearings, I've requested through the planning mail some basic information, a list of objectors and the practice note for the VCAT hearing. My first email said I need to submit an FOI request. The second response said, we will not give you the PMPE2 because VCAT didn't order us to. I thought, okay, I've got the process wrong. It's my first VCAT hearing. Each full-time VCAT consultant I've spoken to has said that's really unusual, that it should have just been sent to us by council. I sent another, multi-day process, sent email to VCAT, and they just forwarded me the email from council. So why is the planning department not providing information? It's not like we're opposing, we want the same thing that council wants. Why am I not getting the information that I'm requesting?
I can't answer that off the top, Jeremy. Can you just say again what the information was that you requested?
The first one was the list of objectors. That has since been provided to me by both the applicant and VCAT. That was the one that I was told needs a FOI request. That's 30 days. The hearing was in 7 days. And the second one was the practice note, also known as the PNPE2, which our VCAT consultant has informed me is really unusual for council to not just send that to an objector. And in that case, I had a copy thing saying, we're not going to give it to you, ask VCAT.
And I'm happy to follow that one up in the morning when I can speak to someone.
Cool. And my second question is, after the first hearing, when I spoke to the town planner, he informed me that his job, being hired by council, was to represent council, which is to defend the refusal. And I was like, cool. I said, what witnesses are you calling? And he said, none. And I said, why? And he said, I've been directed by a manager within the planning department not to call witnesses. At the second hearing, he again said he was not calling witnesses. He was also accompanied by the regional planning officer who recommended for the approval of this application. And he also told me point blank that if we as a group of objectors had decided to settle at that meeting and let the development, or support the development going ahead, that he was authorized to settle with us at that hearing. This doesn't sound like someone who's trying to win defending the refusal, and I just want to know why has he been directed not to call witnesses? Why does it look like he's not trying to win? Why is council's decision to refuse not being properly defended, except by us?
So that conversation was reported to me. Jeremy and I went and spoke to the staff concerned and was assured that there had not been a direction that we wouldn't be engaging any witnesses, and that there had in fact not been a decision made on whether we needed any witnesses at that point. The recent VCAT meeting was a compulsory conference. The primary purpose of those compulsory conferences is to see whether some agreement can be reached between all of the parties, the applicant, the council and objectors, so that the primary purpose of those meetings is essentially to see whether a negotiated outcome can be achieved to negate the need for a full hearing. So that's why there was discussions around could there be concessions made and was there way things to be settled, because that is the purpose of the compulsory conference. Going forward, as we get into practice day hearings and full directions hearings, if we get to those points, it'll be leading into those where we will consider whether we do need to engage any other external people to support our case. Your point about our planning consultant and our planning team's job being to defend the council's decision is entirely correct, and they'll do that based on the grounds of the council's decision.
Thank you. Any other questions from the floor? Yes, please. Just state your name. Thanks, Chrissy.
I'm Chrissy Camp from Wangaratta Stingray Swimming Club. Thank you for already answering the previous question. Wangaratta Swimming Club provided $100,000 to the building of the new WSAC pool, which was less than 0.05% of the cost of the pool. This money came to Wangaratta amateurs from a deceased estate for furthering swimming and infrastructure in Wangaratta. This was not for the use of the Wangaratta Amateur Swimming Club to bargain with going forward to dictate terms of use of the pool for other users. Our question is, what is the life of this $100,000, given that the Wangaratta Amateur Swimming Club have a considerable size club room and that they also have a large storage shed, which probably cost $100,000 to add to the building?
Thanks, Chris, for the question. Sarah or Brendan?
So my understanding is the agreement is a 5-year agreement, and there would be obviously conversations around any renewal of that leading into that period. Whilst you're right, $100,000 is a relatively small percentage of the overall build cost. It's also a big contribution by a small community club, as I'm sure you'd appreciate. Those facilities that they currently have access to through their MOU were not added during the building stage at their request. They were spaces that were built as part of the build, and they negotiated access to those as part of the development of their MOU. So it wasn't like we spent a whole lot of money based on their requirements. They were part of the building components and they negotiated access to those through their MOU discussions.
Do you have another question? Thanks, Mr. And look forward to the process moving forward with Andrew to negotiate something for the stingrays. Are there any other questions for the gallery before we get into food? No. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attendance today. We do appreciate it. Please stay around and have a coffee and some sandwiches. We look forward to you coming again to a council meeting, and thank you for being out here at Whitfield. We love being out here and amongst the country community. Ladies and gentlemen, travel safe home, and we look forward to seeing you again. Have a good night. Thank you.